All right, now let's get the latest from the conference. We now cross to our reporter Natasha Phiri, the ANC's Pule Mabe. Natasha, hi, good afternoon. The ANC's Pule Mabe earlier saying that the conference got off to a very successful start, which is good news. Talk to us about just some of the highlights of what we saw yesterday, the various plenary discussions, and of course, day two, started off in earnest, some of those commissions also getting on board. Talk to us about some of the policy discussions that took place today as well.
Well, very good afternoon once again to United. And of course, to our SABC viewers, we do understand that economic transformation was actually discussed earlier on this morning. Of course, delegates now have had their lunch and are going back into plenary. Of course, some of the highlights of yesterday, United, of course, I remember we were crossing live just to you when we actually spoke about the issue of the president presenting himself to the Integrity Committee. And of course, next week, Wednesday, we are told he'll present himself there again. And that was coming out from George Mashamba, who is the head of the Integrity Committee there of the ANC. Earlier on today, before that briefing with Pule Mabe, we saw Kgalema Motlanthe just briefing or talking to members of the media. Of course, he's made a number of statements. He spoke about the strengthening of the Integrity Committee, also speaking about the step-aside resolution. But of course, I'm joined by political analyst, Mr. Angelo Fick, and of course, we'll be speaking about these matters, unpacking what Mr. Motlanthe said. Mr. Fick, thank you so much for joining us once again. I mean, you heard what Kgalema Motlanthe had to say to members of the media, saying that, the Integrity Committee of the ANC needs to be strengthened. And this is interesting because the policy documents of the party also speak to this effect. The problem that most people actually say or see with the Integrity Committee is that it's somewhat of a toothless body. I mean, it recommends things to the NEC, and the NEC has the power to actually implement the recommendations of the committee.
But this is also not new. We've seen this problem there since 2016 when Mr. Jacob Zuma was as the president of the party. All sorts of recommendations came from the then Integrity Commission which weren't implemented. We've seen it repeat itself again and again. And one of the concerns that I think is, that will be raised by the discussions about the discussion documents is the implementation of the party's constitution, which is linked to the political education of the cadres. So if we take the briefing that we had from Ms. Phoebe Potgieter about the auditing of branches and how people end up joining the party seriously, the question has to be asked, to what extent do the people, and this is an issue raised by the various documents, the political education of the members of the ANC allow for the actual interpretation of its rules, its constitution, and its procedures in line with what the party's vision is on paper, with what its practice is in reality.
I like the fact that you highlight, the members of the ANC. In the policy documents also speaks about how the ANC should actually attract quality membership. And it's seemingly we're not seeing this within the party.
Absolutely. So there's a whole section about so-called lumpens, those people who enter the party for reasons that have nothing to do with the vision of the party. But that section of the discussion documents also takes into account, or should also take into account, the fact that much of the document itself reflects the problem that they want to talk about. So the quality of the discussion in the document, the questions being posed, the way in which they're formulated, all of those issues are central to and are symptomatic of the crisis the party finds itself in. So this is no longer a solution that is as easy to achieve as it may have been 10 years ago or 20 years ago. The documents themselves point to the fact that this has started since the 1990s. The discussions have been had in the party by people about how the party attracts people, who it attracts into its ranks, and how people rise up in the ranks. And we know that this is an issue that has now been articulated as money politics, and critics of the party have talked about the patronage networks, but all of these things are connected. So how party procedures, the constitution, its processes are interpreted, giving the Integrity Commission the ability to effect its decisions, that's one measure. But if the people who have to implement these decisions are not of the caliber that the ANC wishes them to have, then you sit with the same problem. because an organization can only be as strong as its members are. Procedures have to be implemented by human beings. And if the human beings are as flawed as the document indicates these so-called lumpen elements are, we're not necessarily going to have that implementation.
Interesting points there you make. Let's also look at this contentious issue of the step-aside resolution. We heard Mr. Motlanthe saying that the ANC constitution has sufficient measures to deal with its members outside of the step-aside guidelines. What do you make of this loaded statement?
So I suspect that this is a call by Mr. Motlanthe that, the ANC constitution is the supreme document and other rules must to a certain extent give effect to those fundamental issues. But this is the same party that is struggling with the Section 25 land reform issue, where the Constitution allows for certain things but they continue to want to have amendments to the Constitution to do the very thing the Constitution already allows. And here we see intra-party the same issue, a Constitution that according to one of its previous leaders says certain things can be done, but the caliber of discussion doesn't take that Constitution as seriously and then invents another rule. Now, any organization can have this kind of duplication, but in an organization that faces the crises internally that this party faces, the fact that this duplication is still not giving effect to the kinds of, and still not giving the consequences that they wish to desire, tells us something about this isn't just about duplication of rules, this is about implementing the rules and giving strength to the rules and their effectability. Because if you can't effect the rules, it doesn't matter whether the rules are in your constitution or whether additional policies reduplicate the constitution. If those rules are not being given power by the committees, then what you sit with is the malaise that they currently sit with. And this is not to denigrate people, but this is to say, if you wish to take yourself seriously in this reform renewal process, there are some hard truths you have to tell yourself, and it isn't just about quibbling about the rules and whether they're outside the constitution or inside the constitution. It's about effecting wherever they are those rules to make sure that they serve an organization's continuity and longevity better.
He was also critical of the step-aside, resolution, saying that it's been applied selectively.
Absolutely, there is no reason not to believe this. A selective application of rules is part of the problem with the ANC over the last, shall we say, 15 or so years. This is not to say that there wasn't selective application before, but if you have selective application in a party that has diminishing returns in the electorate or from the electorate, what you sit with is greater and greater unhappiness, more and more infighting, because people are now fighting over positions that give them access to state resources. And so those fights will become more vicious, and there will be accusation, counter-accusation about whether or not procedures are fair. And if you want to run an organization, and anybody who's ever been in an organization knows this, if you want procedural fairness, you also have to have administrative equality. And if you don't have administrative equality, all of your processes will be questionable, and questionable not from the outside, but from the inside. And once those processes become questionable to those on the inside, you see the alienation from actual procedural fairness that we're seeing not just in the ANC, but we're seeing elsewhere in the kind of so-called left movement.
Mr. Fick, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having a discussion with you. Interesting insights there coming from Angelo Fick. Unathi, just unpacking what Kgalema Motlanthe had to say earlier on, quite critical there of the step-aside resolution, and also zooming in and highlighting the issue of the Integrity Committee, which is also stipulated within the discussion documents there of the ANC, which also will be highlighted throughout the discussions. We're also told that this very issue will be discussed later on today in commissions. So we really do expect a battle of ideas, Unathi. Also, we'll just be keeping an ear on the ground with our sources, getting all the latest from them in regards to the discussions that are taking place behind closed doors here in Nasrec for the 6th National Policy Conference of the ANC. Of course, today is day 2. We expect tomorrow we expect the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa to wrap up tomorrow, and of course we will be giving you blow-by-blow coverage of everything to do with this policy conference right here in Nasrec in the south of Johannesburg, Unathi.